Hi, my name is Lee Etzold, and I'm the ADLN project manager.
Hi, my name is Gina Pisasale, and I am an ADLN fellow.
And you're listening to
White Canes Connect.
Hey there, PA Federationists. Welcome to another episode of White Canes Connect, presented by the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania. My name is David Goldstein, and joining me today is co-host Lisa Bryant and Simon Bonenfant. Lisa and Simon, how are you today?
Doing well, David.
I'm doing very well.
So, Lisa, what do we have on tap today?
Well, actually, I'm going to hand it over to Simon because he took the helm for this recording. Simon, you had on a couple of folks that are involved in the audio description project. Tell us about that.
Yes, exactly. We spoke with Lee Etzold, the program coordinator of the Audio Description Learning Network, as well as Gina Pisasale, one of the audio describers involved with the project.
And how are you involved with it? How are you personally involved in it?
I am involved because I was hired to be one of the coaches for the network. I was coach at the Hedgerow Theater for their production of A Christmas Carol comedy back before Christmas. So I really enjoyed my time, and yeah, you'll get to hear more about that in the interview.
Okay, well, it sounds really, really interesting, and we're not surprised that you have gotten your foot in this opportunity. So, congratulations to you, and looking forward to hearing this.
Thank you.
All right, why don't we take a listen?
Lee and Gina, it's great to be speaking with you today. Thank you for taking the time to conduct this podcast with me. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Simon.
I'm doing great. I'm so honored to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. Today, we'll be talking about the Audio Description Learning Network, or as Lee said it in the intro, ADLN for short. That's our acronym. And the Audio Description Learning Network is a newly launched initiative that helps to train interested participants in the local Philadelphia area to become audio describers and pair them up with local theaters in the Philadelphia area that need the audio description support, in hopes to increase the offerings of audio description in the Philadelphia area. So we're very excited to be speaking about this wonderful initiative, and we're going to take a deep dive into the ADLN, the history behind it, the current scope of where we are, and the future into where we'd like to go with it. Some of you may have heard about the ADLN before when we had Lee Jackson on and a few other folks from People's Light Theater in Malvern. And Lee spoke about the ADLN a little bit. But as I said earlier, we're going to go into a really deep dive of this work and what it entails and what you can expect when interacting with the ADLN. Lee, I'd like to turn it over to you. For those who are new to this field, can you describe briefly what is audio description, and then go into a little bit about your personal work with the ADLN and how you got involved?
Sure. Thanks, Simon. And I know it can be confusing. We have two Lees working on this project. So if it's helpful to call me Lee Ann, please do so. It's my middle name. My mother calls me Lee Ann, but I'll get over that for this purpose. My understanding of audio description, as it's been described to me, is the verbal depiction of visual images, and more specifically in theater, it's the description of the action and the actors' facial expressions on stage. And we use audio description to help audiences who are blind or low vision or visually impaired more fully experience cultural events in general. The ADLM has been focused on theatrical performances, but it's used in many different venues.
How did you become interested in audio description, and how did you become involved specifically in the ADLN?
I started learning about audio description during the pandemic. I had been involved with a production through the Temple Institute on Disabilities about 10 years ago and knew that audio description was happening, but I didn't understand exactly how it worked. When I started working more closely with the Institute on some digital programming, I learned exactly what was entailed and how much work goes into really understanding the art and the language needed in describing a piece of work, especially if it hasn't already been intended to be appreciated by the blind community. And so I worked with audio describer Nicole Sardella to bring audio description to the digital productions at the Wilma Theater. And we had a lot of fun discussing how we could innovate audio description. One of the things we were really excited about was engaging the actors themselves in their own description of their characters, but mostly of themselves as people on stage. We were calling them audio headshots. And it felt really exciting to have the actors use their own voices to describe how they look on stage. And that became important for a number of reasons, primarily because the Wilma was also doing a lot of plays and productions that touched on issues of racial identity and cultural identity. And we really noticed that it was important for the actors to be able to represent themselves the way they wanted to be represented. So that led to then an even deeper investigation in how to bring audio description back to live theater when we were all back on stage and in the theaters together. And Nicole Sardella and I were talking about how few audio describers there were in the area. And she had just done a training for the Black Star Film Festival. And I was very curious to see if a few of those describers would be willing to work in theater. And audio describing for film is very different than in theater. So we knew it would require some new training. And that's sort of where the ADLN took off. I joined a cohort of theaters in the Philadelphia area who are in conversation with each other about how to improve their accessibility programming and initiatives overall. And a group of 4 representatives from local theaters decided to get together and really focus on audio description. And that's how the ADLN was born. Yeah.
Great. And I know that you were at the Wilma for many years working there. Now you work for the Hello Arts Collective. Can you describe what that is? Is that something that is specifically related to audio description, or is there more encompassed with that?
Hello Arts started actually over 10 years ago when I moved into my new neighborhood in South Philadelphia, and gentrification was an issue. And everyone I spoke to understood that things were changing, but what felt important was to keep conversations between neighbors going. And when people found out I was an artist, they got so excited and talked a lot about the arts that had left the neighborhood. And I found that incredibly sad because, in a way, there were all of these new artists moving into the neighborhood, partly gentrifying it. And there should be, I really wanted for there to be a connection between the neighbors who had already lived in the neighborhood for a long time and the artists who were moving in. And so the Hello Arts started as a hyper-local festival for art making among neighbors. Then I created a similar program for the Wilma and got that up and going, and wound up staying at the Wilma through the pandemic. And that program was called the Portable Studio. And when the opportunity to come back to Hello Arts came up, I was so excited to kind of give it a reboot. And what I realized was that Hello Arts is really about access to art and art making and artists. And everything I've learned over the past 10 years about accessibility has just been in the forefront of my mind. And I retooled the mission of Hello Arts to include the collective of all of the artists I've been in touch with, all of the community organizers I've been in touch with, and all of the accessibility advocates I've been in touch with and I've learned so much from. So it's been very exciting finding ways to create accessible programming and access to the arts for different partners throughout the city. So that's, and the Philadelphia region in general. So that's how Hello Arts came to project manage the ADLN. It felt like a natural next step in growth for Hello Arts, and we're really excited about continuing it if we can. That's our goal.
Well, that's terrific, and I'm sure for you, it's got to be a very nice feeling for you to have started a group, an organization that wasn't started out for this purpose, but has melded into something more of a broader reach. So that must be a very gratifying feeling for you.
It is good, and it helps remind me that we're all still learning, and this is the way we had to grow, and it felt really important, and it feels right. I think that's the thing. I really like being an artist who is responsive to what's going on around me. And I am an administrator. I am I am behind a computer a lot of the times, but there is a huge amount of my work is drawn from my work as an artist. And I always try to stay an artist in everything I do.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about the 4 theaters that are participating in the ADLN and how you were able to use your organization, Hello Arts Collective, to organize these theaters and get them all involved in this one effort. Can you describe a little bit on the back end? And why don't you talk about, firstly, give us the names of the theaters that are involved and tell us a little bit about the coordinators at those theaters that have helped to get this process to what it is. I know from speaking with you and from speaking with the whole ADLN group that it's been very much a team effort and many people have contributed to that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that in terms of the different theaters that are involved?
The other theaters involved in the ADLN are Hedgerow Theater, People's Light Theater, 1812 Productions, and the Wilma Theater. And what I love about this group is everyone is coming to audio description with a different level of understanding. And at the same time, a huge determination to learn more at whatever point they are in their understanding of audio description and their experience with audio description. For example, People's Light and Theater Company and Lee Jackson has been a huge mover and shaker getting audio description and getting getting audience members in to see audio description. She's really helped us understand the process of preparing a theater for audio description, because what we've learned is that it's not just about making sure the equipment works and making sure the audio describer is trained. So much of this is also about making sure people feel welcome and taken care of. And Lee has been fantastic with that. I would not have met Lee Jackson if it wasn't for Marcy Bermusi at Hedgerow Theater, who originally started the accessibility cohort, which is this group of, I would say we're up to 15 or 20 different venues around the Philadelphia area who talk about best practices around accessibility services and primarily relaxed performances. Marcy has definitely been a pioneer in bringing attention to the needs of theaters to offer these services. And then 1812 Productions got involved because of Tyler Melchior, who is actually no longer with 1812 Productions, but is still very active in the Audio Description Learning Network and is my personal accessibility accountability buddy. We are the ones who always email each other and find out why our captioning equipment is not working right, or who did you go to for ASL interpretation? And that's how we have gotten to know each other. So this team, as you talk about it, is absolutely cohesive and collaborative and humble and a joy to work with. When I left the Wilma, we brought Sarah Blask on board to the Audio Description Learning Network, and she's their patron liaison, I believe is her title. And she has just dove right into the learning process. And that's what I really love about this. Everyone's coming in with a lot of humility and curiosity around how we can do this better. So that's our group, and it's a pretty great group.
I was introduced to the ADLN through Marcy as well, and I was actually a coach for the Hedgerow Theater's production. I worked with Gina for that, and we'll get into that in a little bit as to what that means and what that entails. But yes, and I am also very proud and happy to now be an official member of the accessibility cohort as well. So yeah, this is a great team, and like you said, it really works very well. And yeah, we're all looking forward to where it's going to grow in the future. But now it's a good time to talk about the history and a little more about the training and the work that was put into making it what it is today. So after you selected the theaters that were going to be a part of the ADLN, I know you held a training back in October, 2 training sessions actually, to figure out who would be a good fit for applying for the ADLN. But I know that you had several classifications of people that you wanted to apply and take advantage of this wonderful opportunity. Why don't you talk a little bit about the training and the planning process?
The most important thing to us was to schedule these listening sessions. And the listening sessions were with the blind low vision community, but also with venues and with members of service providers. Some of the folks we were talking to were from VisionLink Philadelphia, Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired in Montgomery and Chester counties, Artreach, the NFBFPA, like the Keystone chapter. We had a lot of people that we were trying to get in the room as far as informing what the program should really be. Because what we wanted to do was diversify the bench of audio describers and make sure that we were being representative in the accessibility services, because more and more theaters are diversifying the stories they're telling on stage. So we felt like it needed to also, that value needed to be applied also to the services that the venues were seeking out to connect audiences to those stories. And so we had these listening sessions, learned a lot from them, and then reached out to Nicole Sardella. It felt very important that we offered free training first and foremost. And so we did offer 2 days, as you said. The first day was open to anyone who wanted a audio description 101. This is how you start and the principles behind it. Then the second day was more focused, and we did want to specifically offer training to people who were interested in going further. And we wanted people to understand that we were going to be offering a fellowship to folks who identified as BIPOC or LGBTQ+, and that the training would continue to be free for everyone, but if they wanted to apply for the fellowship, that was part of our requirements. We really wanted to prioritize those folks. So the second training was in person. We got into the weeds, into the details and the strategies and the highs and lows of audio describing, some of the obstacles that audio describers might encounter. We really wanted to be very upfront about how much work it was and how much education you have to do as an audio describer sometimes when you show up to a venue. A lot of times you are the person who is advocating for all of this customer care and quality of audio description, that we heard from audience members that they really desired. So the audio describer actually, in a way, is also an advocate. So after the training was completed, we did record it as well, and it's posted on the Hello Arts website for anybody who wants to see it.
Gina, I'd like to invite you into conversation here. You were a fellow at the Hedgerow Theater, as we mentioned, and we'll get to talking about that in a little bit. But since we're talking about the training sessions now, you were a participant in these trainings, and that really started your journey into audio description. Describe a little bit about what goes into good audio description and what goes into training an audio describer from your experience for those that are interested.
Oh my goodness. That's such a big question. It's so funny. I initially went to the trainings just out of pure curiosity. I really didn't think my fate would include becoming an audio describer. I am a dramaturg in the theater, which really helps to map out the content and context of storytelling in a live arts kind of performance, in terms of script and things like that. So I've always worked with directors and playwrights and sometimes actors in terms of like clarifying story or just storytelling in general. And I was always curious about how that practice aligned with audio description. And I had a suspicion that dramaturgs would make very good audio describers. So it was almost an exploratory experience going to the training, but as I was, kind of listening to, I mean, the first was on Zoom and then the second was in person, and the two are kind of blending themselves together a bit. That I more and more there was this sneaking voice that was like, "You should do this. You would actually be good at this. I think you should try to do this. I think you can." So what it was, it terrified me at first because trying to trying to describe something to me, I am incredibly loquacious and I overtalk, which will probably become obvious as we're going through this podcast. And the idea of just like the efficiency and I don't know, just that kind of immediacy and skill for audio description, the idea like terrified me. And I did not think I had the talent to do it. But as the training was going, and to your question, Simon, of what makes a good audio describer, so much of it is really what dramaturgs do is really asking the question of like, what's at the heart of this moment? What's really important to the story? What's important to the audience's experience of the story? And from a visual perspective, then, how do you distill what's important for someone who is blind or low vision or visually impaired to be able to continue kind of riding the ride of a play with everyone else? And that kind of when that idea kind of crystallized in my head, that's when I said, like, I think I can do this. So it's the idea of, choosing what is the key, what is key to the story, which can look like very different things from play to play, or even from like scene to scene. And I mean, really understanding the story that the playwright meant to tell, that the director is intending to tell, but also that the theater is intending is really important as well, so that as an audio describer, you know which things to lift. And I mean, as Lee was talking, and this is always my question, I identify as Asian American, so I am a person of color. I just constantly have a lot of questions of why it is important that I identify as such. And I think this is where the idea of like artistic subjectivity comes in, and why I think it makes a difference when you have, a dramaturg that identifies a certain way, or an audio describer potentially that identifies a certain way. Because, my life experience has shaped my lens to be able to see things and experience the world in a way that's different from me or from you, Simon. And the idea of like, how can I add that kind of perspective and access to an experience after, of course, kind of collaborating with the larger ideas of the playwright and the director and the theater, to really give an audience like a certain kind of just emotional ride of which is what a play is, became really like a deep curiosity to me of like how all of these threads got braided together. And I'm still very, I think I feel a certain imposter syndrome to a certain extent. I'm just like, how can I put my stamp on determining what's important? You know what I mean? But the trainings kind of helped break down that sense of perfectionism, or that sense of right, wrong, that even Nicole Sardella, who has been doing this work for I don't know how many years, even during the trainings was saying like, oh, I totally messed this one thing up, and I totally didn't make this one call, or like this description happened and this was happening over there too. So that like there is like there's a human element to it all. So I think the idea of it being kind of just organic and being able to kind of dance with the play itself as it's going was also something invitational and of great curiosity to me too. And also something that I've learned is a skill for audio describers for a live performing arts piece. And then some of the, Nicole had an amazing this PowerPoint presentation. that also helped to kind of just break down. And to me, it was breaking down my anxieties of this idea of a perfect audio described piece, of what, just essentializing what's important, um, thinking about kind of cultural sensitivity, and who you are offering the service for. That is so important. And then meeting people where they are, which includes me, like as an audio describer as well. So I think those are kind of like the big highlights, and just takeaways that I got from the trainings.
That was a very beautiful description of the way you described that and used a few good metaphors there. For those who don't know you, they can probably tell you're a theater person just by the way you described that, because that was very nice, a very elegant description there. And you're also being very humble. You did a very nice job, and I know you're going to continue to make a wonderful audio describer as you continue to dive into this field.
I'm still a student.
I'd like to turn it back to you, Lee. When you got the applications for the ADLN, what were your key targets that you were trying to look for in terms of personality traits, in terms of experience?
We had to acknowledge that we were asking and attempting to do a lot. We wanted to not discourage anyone from trying audio description. We wanted to encourage people to bring their whole selves to the process. And we also wanted to be very clear on what was required for successful audio description. So we had a lot in the balance. And the application process involved us also sort of arriving at what we called like a rubric, really. And it was, we tried to keep it very simple and broad. We knew we wanted the fellowship to address audience care and cultural competency. We wanted to make sure we were addressing language choice, like nuanced language choice, and the technical elements like vocal clarity and timing, but also professionalism and collaboration and like curiosity, because in the end, we were also inviting people into our network. And we wanted to acknowledge and really state up front that we are all learning how to do this better. So there might not be one right way to do all of this. And that felt really important. And we wanted to express that before we even selected the fellows. So making sure that everybody who had gone through the training with us was on board with our journey, our educational journey. So the application process, we invited people to share a little bit about themselves and why they wanted to learn more about audio description. Then we also asked them to give us a sample, and they recorded themselves describing an object, which was something that Nicole Sardella had them practice in the training. So we felt we wanted to set people up for success, but also invite them into a supportive environment.
You mentioned the application process. Now let's talk about who were the fellows, and why don't you talk about the overall structure of the ADLN? You really made it a very supportive environment, as you mentioned, by including many different folks in this process. It wasn't just a very daunting process. You really softened the blow, I guess, by adding many different people that could help and provide support and really work through this exploratory journey. How did you come about with that method? And why don't you give the names of all the folks who were involved in those teams for the theaters?
Oh, great. Okay. It's time for the roll call. So what's so exciting about this is that the group is really big. I'll try to give you the key players, but we are stronger because we have a lot of voices in the room, and that feels very important. So the fellows we selected, um, actually, I should start by saying the fellows were actually the last group added. We really wanted to make sure we had a supportive team in place before we selected anyone to start a fellowship. And that resulted in what we called little pods. So every theater we called a training site. And each training site had a staff member who was a representative, and they were sort of leading the pod, the training site pod. Every training site also included a blind low vision coach who had experience using audio description and a mentor who had experience providing audio description. Now, because we were working at a little bit of a deficit in audio describers that we knew of anyway, the mentors were actually harder to come by, but we found some great ones. So the first was Jahan Thomas, who was the very first audio description fellow. When I piloted this program at the Wilma, she was brought in and was the Black Star Film Festival audio describer who was willing to try live theater. And ever since then, she has been really key in helping us understand what we need to provide audio describers. She has helped us understand the timeline, how much time it takes. Nicole Sardello also helped train Jahan, and they've been in conversation about strategies and also obstacles that audio describers encounter. So her participation, even though she's a very new audio describer, that felt like a really important perspective to add as a mentor to someone who is also going to be new at audio describing. So she's one of our mentors. We also engaged Wimoto Naoka, who through Black Star Film Festival is actually a screenwriter and a director. She is one of the greatest audio description writers I have come across in a while, and is wonderful at creating scripts with audio describers about how to essentialize that language. So she's on board as a mentor as well. We have, of course, the incomparable Nicole Sardella, who has been part of audio description in Philadelphia for, I believe, 15 years. She might correct me a little later. But then we also engaged Mimi Smith, who was, I believe, the mentor at Hedgerow with you, Simon. And her husband, Steve, also has been an audio describer for many years too. And I believe we're involved in training Nicole way back when. So we had a great team of mentors. And then we reached out to you, Simon, through Marcy to get you involved as a coach, because you also do a lot more than just be an audience member for the theater and for audio description. I know you also do Philly Touch Tours and a lot of other organizations you're helping out with this initiative. And then we also have Charmaine Parrish, who is an audience member who, she's funny. She says, I just kept asking questions about how I could get involved. Well, that was her big mistake, because now she's involved in everything. So also at People's Light, Natanya Sortland is going to be our coach, and Natanya is also contributing a lot to our learning. She is a bubbly, effervescent personality as well. So she brings joy to the rooms that we're in, which is great.
Our listeners may recognize the name Natanya because she was on a recent episode 92 of White Canes Connect, when we had People's Light on to discuss their offerings as well. So now that we've talked about that, let's get into what a lot of us would consider maybe more the fun stuff of the topics here, the actual plays and the work that was done to get this all off the ground and running very smoothly. And one of the reasons that we talked about the behind the scenes work and really the process that went into all this is because we'd like more theaters to jump on this and either work with us, or for folks that are in other cities or in other countries even that don't have this program, we'd really like for people to get on board with this and try to do it in their own area, because what we've done here in Philadelphia is very unique. So I just didn't want to mention that's one of the reasons why we went pretty deep in the weeds of this process and what it took. So let's get into the decision-making process when deciding which plays would be audio described by which fellows. Tell us about that, Lee.
The plays had to be in place. We had to know what plays we were going to be doing so we could offer that particular performance to a fellow. And so we all got our schedules together and our calendars out, and we looked at timelines, but also content. And at one point, we actually, I believe, had 3 different Christmas carols on the table. And then we realized that might have been a little too much. So we changed to make sure we had a nice amount of time to spend with each fellow on a production. And we tried to avoid overlap. It was a little bit of a matrix, but I love spreadsheets, and I felt like this was my strong point. So I made sure we were taking into account how much lead time an audio describer needs, and then lined it up with the seasons. It worked out really well in the end. So right off the bat, we hit the ground running with Hedgerow Theater's production of A Christmas Carol comedy, which was described by yours truly here on this podcast, Gina Pisasale, and coached by yours truly also on this podcast, Simon Bonenfant. And also we had Mimi Smith coaching. Then in a totally different sort of genre, we brought Joe Barsanti in as a fellow to describe 1812's production of This Is the Week That Is. Now, for those of you who know, this show has been produced for many, many years. They do a different incarnations, and it involves improvisation, and it's also a musical. And in his application process, Joe said that he was interested in musicals and improvisation. So that helped a lot. Gina was thrown into the weeds with A Christmas Carol comedy because it's a two-hander, which means there are 2 people on stage, and one of the actors was playing Ebenezer Scrooge, which left the other actor to play all of the other parts. And I'll let Gina talk more about that journey for her. But those were 2 very different shows. Next up, we have at People's Light and Theater Company a one-man show called Small. One-person shows are also very different because of how much dialogue they often have. In audio description, you really don't want to speak over dialogue when you're describing what's happening on stage. So that will be a very exciting challenge for Beth Feldman, who's going to be describing that production. This will be coming up at the end of January. Then February is going to be at the Wilma with their production of My Mama and the Full-Scale Invasion, which will be described by Felicia Teeter. And that's also a very ethereal production. The set is very abstract. So there will be some very interesting and a wide variety of approaches to audio describing. And what's important is that all of these fellows attend each other's productions, which means that one audio describer is going to describe for the other fellows as well as their coach and their mentor. So we can all learn from their experience and be in conversation about the very different experiences each of these fellows will have.
Yes, and I know that the invitations have been extended to me as well to come and give feedback and to help with that effort, and something I'm very happy to do. So I'm glad you pointed that out again, that team effort of experience coming together. So Gina, let's dive into your experience audio describing A Christmas Carol comedy. And it was great that was the opening ADLN performance that we had. It was right around Christmas time, a few weeks before Christmas. And as Lee had already mentioned, this was a two-man show. What was the process like for you from when you first heard that this would be your task? What was the planning process like for you from day one in that?
Initially, after the training, I was feeling very confident. And then I went to see the play. I actually went to go see a production. And luckily, I am already affiliated with Hedgerow. I'm doing some work with Marty Bermusi, the artistic director there too. So I did, and I have worked with both of the cast members before as well. So I knew both of their styles, especially Chris Patrick Mullen, who, as Lee was saying, is the actor that was playing everyone else. And he actually is an incredible, just physical performer, character actor. And he improvs a lot as well. He's in these kinds of roles. So I didn't know exactly what to expect anyway. But really, the first thing that I did was just to read and reread the play. And I, having been a theater practitioner for 25 plus years or so, I've been very used to reading plays. And as a dramaturg, I've read plays in certain ways. So reading them with the kind of with the new perspective of being an audio describer was a completely different experience for me. Just reading a play with that kind of in mind. So I read it a few times actually, and I just marked actually where major plot points happened or major kind of actions were happening. And I also I highlighted all of the stage directions, which you don't really ever do, when you're reading a script or as an actor, unless you're reading stage directions, like for a reading or something like that too. Because that's like informing, from the playwright's perspective, what's important in terms of visual cues and actions that are happening. And then I went to see the play, and it was a different. I explained this to you, Simon. I have two children, and they're on the younger side, so they're 8 and 10. So I went with them. So I went just to experience kind of just the joy of the production with them. They're laughing. There's all kinds of humor, like low, high, you name it. So. I kind of just experienced the joy, which is what I always say, just like the emotional ride of the evening. Like, what is the intention of this experience? And kind of trying to be able to articulate that even for myself after seeing the play. Not looking at it like, there's a moment here where I can sneak in a word, or here's a moment where I would definitely need to describe what's happening, things like that too. So the next stage after that was that we had our meeting. And this is when I first met Simon, and also Mimi and Stephen Smith as well. And it was a meeting before the preview performance. And when I saw that on the schedule, I initially thought that that was me scheduled to actually just go see the show. But then I got the news that like, oh no, you're actually going to do your practice call on this night. I was like, oh, okay. And it was, I think, like a week or so. I forget how much time there was left. So I actually didn't have a chance to go see the show again, which I think I would have if I had time. But I was lucky enough to get a video recording, not of the present production, but of the previous year's production, which was very similar. There were differences, though, as I learned as I went. And I studied that video like to a T. And this is where I'm very, like, I know I'm very jealous of audio describers for film and television because it's a set entity where you know where there's time, things aren't necessarily malleable. There isn't audience response. So I was, again, because of my kind of sense of perfectionism and not like willingness not to just depend on my own kind of impulses in the moment, I literally wrote down words to say, timed out to potentially when I could have a second to sneak in. Because the other thing about this play too was that it's incredibly quick. There's really not much air between lines. I don't know how the actors really moved at that pace for that long, and then we're up right at the end. So it really became an exercise in being, again, selective. And of course, like being a theater practitioner for me and coming also out of like directing and design and those kinds of things, everything is significant. I was like, the color of that tablecloth is so significant. I was like, no. And actually knowing it was a comedy, just having to keep reminding myself of like, what is going to help best set up the comic moments really were like kind of, North Star kind of questions that I was able to keep returning to as I was literally kind of making notes in my script. And then, so we had our meeting, and it was really wonderful for me just to be able to ask questions, and for folks that are, I don't know, kind of finding themselves in potentially like spaces of meeting someone that's culturally different to them. Sometimes you feel like you can ask, you have deep curiosities, but you don't want to ask a stupid question, or you don't want to offend anyone, or there's this sense of, a deep responsibility to having prepared for this event and things like that too. But Simon, Mimi and Stephen put me right at ease, and I was able to really ask kind of like what I, in my mind were like dumb questions. And I was able to also, in terms of just like cultural kind of awareness building too, ask for that kind of feedback, even in my own kind of internalized ableism and how I'm speaking and how I'm presenting and things that I'm kind of noticing or really highlighting too. So that meeting itself, I think it was like 2 hours, was really incredible. And you just, I think, put me at ease and made yourself to be such a wonderful, generous, and open resource where, again, I could ask anything, small, large, anything. So I felt really, really supported by this structure that the ADLN put together, with having a coach from blind and low vision community, in addition to mentors who did have experience audio describing. So it was almost like, being able to hold on to the wall before letting go in the pool. I'm like, okay, all right, I got my team of support. Because I think if it was like, okay, you've gone through, the Zoom training and the in-person training that the general group went through, and then all of a sudden, if you were like just thrown into the position to audio describe, I think I probably would have broken down a bit. So to feel that kind of support, to be able to ask those kinds of questions, and actually even to receive kind of validation of like, you do theater, so you do know what you're doing.
Yeah, I remember saying that. Yeah.
Was actually it's very simple, but very kind of necessary for me in that moment.
Yeah.
So, and
What?
then, like having gone through the video, and then getting to my preview performance, I don't know if that's where we can start there, where, we were testing the equipment and everything like that. And folks from the Audio Description Learning Network, including you, Simon, and Charmaine, and Lee Etzold, and Lee Jackson, and the other organizers and the fellows also, all had headsets and were able to listen to my first try at audio describing. And then we had a feedback session afterwards, which was super amazing. And then I think it was a week later, it was the kind of publicly advertised performance that I got to audio describe.
Yeah, let's talk about that feedback a little bit as we're diving deeper into that structure. What do you feel like for you was the most important feedback that was taken from those sessions and us kind of giving our experiences and contrasting several things? I know that there were even a few things that I didn't even know of because they were more visual things, and a couple people were telling me certain things that I wasn't even aware of, which can sometimes be a bit of a disconnect just because I'm not actually seeing the production as everybody else is. Um, but from your perspective, what was one or two maybe of the most important points of feedback for you that really prepared you for the public performance? And we'll touch more on that in a minute.
Sure, sure. Simon, I would have to say that what you just said was actually one of the most important pieces of the feedback because, we are all in our own, obviously, kind of personal mindsets of what's important in the world. And this is, but when like moments when you said, I was confused about this, or, when we were talking about moments and you said, oh, I didn't understand how that bed was set up, or I really didn't like the character transitions were really confusing to me and just presenting it so just very like kind of plainly and simply was amazing how clarifying that was and something I honestly wasn't thinking about. So the idea of like that's why this work needs to happen, I think, by, for, and about with members of like blind low vision community who are willing, I think, to offer that kind of feedback. Because those of us who, have lived a sighted life and moved through the world in that way do not have this like assume so much. And I think whenever you were offering any kinds of opinions about like, I was actually confused by this, went to then, caused me to then go back into the script, into what I'm calling my calling script, and really clarify or use like revise words or phrases or like just take things away or put things back, that would address the points of confusion that you kind of marked. The other thing, so there are two things. It was just, for the key things were your feedback for sure. But then the importance of pre-show notes. I did not appreciate the importance of pre-show notes to set up what you could then refer back to, or that what you can rely on or lean into as you are making the call for the show itself, so that you can design almost a shorthand. You can set things up in such a way that clarifies references later on. So the conversations around what the content of the pre-show notes really, really important.
Yes, and let's set that up a little bit. For those who are unfamiliar with live theater, usually the audio describer will do a pre-show description of the set, the theater in general, some of the plot points if it relates to the performance, something that is important to know ahead of time as a heads up when you don't have as much time to speak that information in the play because you have a very limited time in between pieces of dialogue, or when something is happening that's very important, you have very little time to give those clarifications or take the time you need to explain something that's more complicated. And you did a very wonderful job with those, as you had mentioned. And the other part of this that is a little bit unique, it doesn't happen at all audio described productions. It's something that more theaters are trying to get equipped to do and trying to have the training to do, is to have a sensory tour that accompanies the play before the play starts, have a time when blind and visually impaired patrons can come to the theater a little bit earlier and feel the set and even talk to the actor a little bit and have verbal descriptions even of some of these things that complement the pre-show and obviously complement the full audio description as well. What was it like for you in the process of planning the pre-show notes and also the sensory tour that we had?
So I was so grateful that the actors were able to come to the sensory tour, because, as you said, there's two characters, one plays Scrooge and one plays everyone else, and for Christopher Patrick Mullen to be able to offer his voice to indicate characters of like, this is Belle, this is Mrs. Cratchit, this is Peter Cratchit, this is Tiny Tim, in an audio way, audially, and so that you can give a little, he would give a little bit of you got a little bit of a preview of how quickly those character changes happened, and to hopefully that kind of give you a little bit of a primer on Chris's character voices to help clarify who was like speaking and acting, maybe even in 4 words, and then switching to another character or something like that. The Cratchit dinner scene was that level of 4 words here, 5 words here, and Chris switching characters and switching eyeglasses actually was the visual cue of which character Chris was playing at the time. And also, because it's a comedy, I have to mention this. There's a rubber chicken that's in the Cratchit scene. And I think part of the joy, like the tickly joy of like just visually experiencing that, is when Mrs. Cratchit, Chris playing Mrs. Cratchit, picks up kind of a domed platter lid and there's a rubber chicken that's stuck inside of it. And it's a surprise for the audience. And I remember wondering if we should put that in the touch tour, that rubber chicken, because it does play very, very highly and very much in the comedy of what happens after it makes its initial appearance. But it was so interesting to hear what is useful to load audiences with beforehand. Like what is the compromise of surprise versus presenting a prop or something that does provide that surprise for a sighted audience, but giving blind, kind of visually impaired folks just the anticipation of that prop. And Lee Etzold, it's like, whenever you get a chance to squeeze a rubber chicken, go for it. So that's really what sealed the deal of that prop going into the touch store.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
But it went to it was a very silly conversation and I loved the email thread. I laughed every time. But it got to a really central idea, I think, of how important pre-show setups can be. Not with at stake, but you have to kind of shift a bit of a cultural lens in terms of what is going to elevate or really set up the ride of, again, the comedy in the best way possible for a blind, visually impaired audience. So that would, in addition so Chris giving his vocal malleability and you being able to, hear the change, the instantaneous changes from one character to the other. In addition to just the thoughtfulness of what are the and there's not much time for a touch tour. So what are just the 5 key props that will help, again, with the North Star of this is a comedy. So what is going to help you with laugh just as loudly as everyone else with kind of some of the visual comedy of the play itself. My pre-show notes, the audio description learning network is wonderful because they gave me they gave all of the fellows an outline to fill in. Basically, it's kind of just like what you will hear. So here's the set. The following was a description of the set for the scenes for the entire play, and then that's left for us, the fellows, to fill in, right? So I did that very diligently. I'm like an A student, and then that was the pre-show for my practice call. And a lot of the conversation we had during our pro-show conversation was about what I could potentially then add to the pre-show notes to clarify architecture in the theater, to clarify that bed setup, to clarify moments where like props are moving in certain ways or what sides of the stage things were coming on and off with. And my pre-show notes then got, I think, and also Simon, to your note about confusion when Chris was switching from character to character, like the different language, because assuming that maybe someone might not have been able to experience Chris doing those vocal kind of flips that he did before the show, like how could I help set up with pre-show notes that experience of those character changes for you? So I think the length of my pre-show notes doubled between the first run and the feedback session, and then the actual performance. And it really helped to also then make my language during the call itself more efficient, because I was able to set myself up with words that I could then refer back to, like as I was calling, so I could, cut some things here and there. And it felt like it was surgical, like just one or two words cutting made a lot of difference as you were going through this like very quickly moving play. So this is just my experience of pre-show notes is still, I feel, very at the very novice level, but I really understood the power of them and the great kind of exercise. And it's a dramaturgical exercise of really distilling what goes into those touch tours and what you're asking even of the actors when they do come to those pre-show sessions.
Yeah, you mentioned a great point about the surprise element and how not to go too much into that without spoiling that information for the show, but then also having the balance of giving that information. And I think that's one of the great things you did well, but it can be a challenge to do. And I remember there were a few times where maybe those surprise elements were going on when we did the preview production and people were laughing, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I could laugh along, but I don't know what's going on. So and that is something that we deal with a lot in life as blind and visually impaired people, that somebody will make a visual reference or something will happen visually and it's like everybody's into this and I don't know what's going on. So that's something that those pre-show notes and the sensory tour really does help with. And I think it also underscores what you were saying earlier about the inclusive, welcoming nature. It was very nice to meet both the actors and get to feel very welcomed into the space. And I had already known about this for a while because I was part of the process, but it really does get a welcoming feel. And for those sighted audience members that experience talkbacks or certain things that have happened maybe behind the scenes, it just does add to it and express a feeling of welcoming and inclusive environment. So we'd like to thank Hedgerow for incorporating that and making that such a part of the process. And I'd like to see more theaters get involved in that. Let's go to you, Lee. As we wrap up, you mentioned it earlier a little bit, but we have the People's Light production coming up, and we also have the Wilma's production coming up. Tell us a little bit about where people can find more about that information and where they can buy tickets. and participate in the audio description experience?
Coming up, our next publicly described performance will be at People's Light and Theater Company in Malvern, Pennsylvania. It's the production of Small by Robert Montano. The audio described performance, I believe, is also a relaxed performance on January 28th at 2 p.m. It will be described by our audio description fellow, Beth Feldman Brandt. And there is more information on the Hello Arts Collective website, helloartscollective.com. If you look for ADLN shows, it will be on that page as well as links to the theater's website. So you can also find tickets at People's Light. Then following the People's Light performance will be the Wilma Theater's My Mama and the Full-Scale Invasion. The Wilma is located at 265 South Broad Street in Center City, Philadelphia. This is a co-production with Woolly Mammoth Theater Company, and their audio described show will be on February 18th at 2 p.m., described by Felicia Teeter. And again, there are links on the website to more details about the production itself. Just to your point, I know we have to wrap up, but about pre-show notes, it is our hope too that we acknowledge the fact that sighted audiences get a lot of information before they come to the show. There are all kinds of descriptions and videos on websites, and even the program itself has a lot of information. And so those pre-show notes, I'm hoping, will eventually get on these websites so that anyone can get that pre-show information that they want. We're moving towards it. We're getting there.
Very good. And I want to underscore one thing that you mentioned for those who may not be familiar. What is a relaxed performance?
Relaxed performances take many different forms, depending on the production itself. But the idea of a relaxed performance, above all, is that it's a shush-free environment, and we're inviting audience members to bring their full selves to the production. The house lights might be up a little bit so people could come and go as they please. There's sometimes fidget libraries where people can borrow a fidget and use it during the performance if that helps them enjoy the show a little better. We'll be hopefully promoting more relaxed performances in the coming months. The accessibility cohort is working on finding ways to promote those performances more fully. There are a lot going on in the area, and we really want to make sure the audiences know about them.
If I can add a little bit to that too. So the relaxed term in there is for theaters, like theater staffs, and like the etiquette of theater actually to relax. It's not telling the audience to relax or the people that are coming to the theater to relax. It's not like, listen, relax. It's like, no. We are relaxing just the assumed formality of theater etiquette. And people can come and go as they please. You're allowed vocalization, stimming, any kind of response that, like in a formal kind of typical theater setting, might be considered like distracting or like Dee was saying, get just or something like that, is welcome in the space. And it's initially started for folks that identified in the neurodiverse spectrum, but it is also for folks that experience PTSD or Alzheimer's, or even for if you're a mother with a 1-year-old, who you don't know how that's going to go after the first 15 minutes of the play. A relaxed performance is perfect for you to come and experience that. Or even if you have an 8-year-old, you don't know how it's going to go for the first 15 minutes. I think it's one of those kind of universal design ideas that can extend much farther beyond those who identify as neurodiverse.
I have a dream that every performance becomes a
Is
relaxed.
relaxed performance. Yes.
Well, that's a great program, and thank you both for giving details on that. So, Lee, as we look forward going into 2024, we know that we have these performances coming up after February. I know we don't have a concrete maybe message to tell the listeners about what's to come with the ADLN, but what are your hopes for the ADLN to come? And is there any room for blind and visually impaired listeners or for anyone listening to get involved in the next stage of what you're planning and what your vision is for the ADLN?
Well, we are always welcoming people into the ADLN. I will tell people, if you give me your email, I'm going to send you some emails. So the future is going to include a lot more listening. We're going to have a final listening session from this season. So at the very end of February, we're going to get the gang together and ask questions about the biggest takeaways we have and some visioning for the future. We have some ideas of where we want to go. We've heard a lot of interest in bringing audio description to other venues, like museums. We've also heard about deepening the practice, like I was mentioning, and making sure we have partners who can offer services to theaters if they do want to know how to do a really good touch tour, or if they do need support, making sure their website can host all of the supportive material that will help this audience come to their shows. I have a big dream of also encouraging artists and arts organizations to design theater with accessibility in mind, to create theater from the get-go. So I've been in conversation with the Institute on Disabilities and also with ArtReach in the hopes of creating more environments for that to happen. Creative labs, more listening sessions, just keeping the conversation going.
I think also, Simon, if there are listeners that are not in the Philadelphia region and are interested in theater going, to send them potentially this podcast to their theater of choice, to design, to kind of collect, get a cohort together and start to do this work. Because, I mean, Lee gives such an example, like how it started is just people that were passionate and interested in it. Like Lee and I both do not have a background in neuroscience or like accessibility. I don't think you do, Lee.
Oh, I don't. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, or like just like this. So the idea that it's possible, I think, is, and that it's not that it's easy, but that like steps to just get into the conversation and just to start people thinking that it's possible is so important. And I think if you have access to like theaters or, you know, certain other live performing arts spaces, to send them this podcast, just to start that seed of an idea that that this work is totally possible.
I think the biggest obstacle too is that you're not alone in figuring out how to get accessibility in your budget, how to get your organization on board, that there is a community, yes, beyond Philadelphia, of course, who is like trying to figure out how to make this happen in an arts culture that hasn't always been welcoming. So I think you hit the nail on the head there with this call to spread the word and connect with each other, because this is happening. This is happening in other places. We just don't always talk to each other about it.
That's one of the reasons, as I mentioned earlier, why we went very methodically, step by step, into how this program was created, how the trainings were done, how the people were selected. Because not only do we hope that it gives blind and visually impaired listeners an inside look into what goes into audio description, because many are very interested, and many sighted listeners are as well, into what goes into audio description. But it's also an audio training guide in a way to be able to go to other theaters and go to other cultural institutions and say, this has been done here. Here's a framework. And I would speak for the ADLN a little bit to say that if people have further questions, I would have them get in touch with the ADLN and they can help in other areas as well as our knowledge and our time permit to do so. So now that the 4 fellows are trained and as of February will have had the experiences, Lee, are they now contracted with the theaters that they have worked at to provide audio described content for the upcoming plays, or is that something that's going to be in the works with those specific theaters?
Well, what often happens is that audio describers are independent contractors hired by theaters to do the work. Sometimes they are staff members. That doesn't always happen. So what the ADLN wants to do additionally is help prepare audio describers to be entrepreneurs a little bit and to advocate for themselves and what the best practices around audio description as they understand them and what they need as an audio describer. And so what I hope to do for the ADLN fellows in terms of what Hello Arts can provide is my hope is to create a directory so that theaters can find these trained audio describers and get in touch with them. And I also want to continue that sense of community around the audio describers and including them and all of the coaches and mentors we've been engaging with and the people who have had experience in audio description so that the learning continues.
Fantastic. If folks wanted to contact you and Hello Arts as well as the ADLN, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I have a contact page on my website. You can definitely send me an email that way. And I'm working on getting a phone number. If the website is not accessible, I'm really hoping it is. I've worked very hard to make it accessible. But perhaps I can also leave a link in however you share the podcast with your listeners.
Yes, we will put a link in the show notes. Absolutely.
Great.
And if there's an email, is there an email address?
Right now I am LETZOLD at helloartscollective.com.
As we leave today, I'd like each of you to take 1 or 2 minutes to share a piece of advice, either for audio describers or theaters that are looking to get into this field. Why would a theater get into audio description and relaxed performances and just accessibility efforts as a whole? What advice would you give to theaters who maybe would be on the fence about that? And why should they get involved in accessibility for all? I'll start with you, Lee, and then we'll head to Gina.
My first impulse is like, why wouldn't you?
Yes, I know. I'm just saying, how to set up a question here. Yeah.
No, I think in my heart of hearts, I believe that arts organizations want to do their art for as many people as possible, not just for monetary reasons, but just because we don't exist without our audiences. I'm talking about especially performing arts. We are nothing without the other side of the proscenium. And I feel like we become better artists when we are seen by more people with different backgrounds, with different experiences. And it's a huge value of mine to stay curious. And I feel like if other arts organizations also value that kind of curiosity, then it's sort of a no-brainer. More people is better in the arts. We need it right now more than anything.
And Gina?
I fully agree, Lee. I would say as anyone aspiring to be an audio describer, luckily you have access to a whole lot of descriptions on any of the streaming services. You can just put on the audio description just to begin to hear what it even sounds like. So that's what I first started to do. when I first went to this training, and that really that idea that it's possible, both for theaters, them producing theaters, and for aspiring audio describers. But that there is always room to learn and to grow. I think some of the most fulfilling artistic experiences that I've had were working with folks that identify in the disability community. So working with a blind actor and working with a deaf actor. I think you learn so much about just what's possible in your craft. And to Lee's question of why not, of like that there is so much discovery that lives on the other side of that question that I could not even imagine before I started this process. And I think that why a lot of us got into theater is because of that constant curiosity, that Lee was talking about, that constant sense of like, there must be more. There's something in the negative space all around me. I'm curious about difference, about how I can connect and engage and use different ways to communicate. I just think that this really falls into the wheelhouse of why so many of us became artists and theater practitioners to begin with. And doing this work, I was able to reconnect with that kind of original seed that started me in this field. And I just think that because it's so reachable and possible, that it's just something that isn't just a benefit almost to self-growth, but to communal growth as well. And if you are in a position to be able to open up space, to open up opportunities, to share joy, to like give someone a rubber chicken to squeeze that wouldn't have had the opportunity otherwise, just do it. Like this world needs it.
As Lee was talking about earlier about the importance of audio describers advocating for this and getting the experience in this area, you really embody that, Gina. And it kind of goes back to what I had mentioned to you when we first started this process of you kind of have to think like a blind or visually impaired person. And it's not obviously that you're thinking in the same way, but you can have that empathy and that drive to have an open mind to looking at something in a different way than you would experience it and putting yourself in another person's shoes in a way to get that same experience, that same feeling, that same type of communal shared experience and that joy that you had mentioned, Gina, about that. And I think aside from the joy of the play or the joy of the experience, there is really a value in being able to independently experience something in full and knowing that the people around this movement, around this environment are supportive and are trying every day to work hard and make this process as seamless and as professional as possible. And I know I can speak from the blind and visually impaired perspective that if you build it, they will come. We are very involved in this area. And I think one of the stigma is that blind and visually impaired people may not be interested in this kind of theatrical space when really there's not been the space for many years to express that and have those open dialogues and open discussions. And now that they're happening more, we're seeing that we are interested and we always have been interested. It just takes some people to get the conversation going and the squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say in that.
You reminded me of something that was a really important learning that I had personally, which was in speaking to an audience member who was using the audio description and they had the headsets on. We were talking about the different kinds of headsets that are used. And someone mentioned that they always like to have one ear open to the audience, that they're not necessarily even worried about missing something on stage, but that it felt really important to be connected to the other audience members around them. And that's why they always listened with one ear off of, one headset off of their ear. And that was a very informative moment for me. I was like, this is about community too. And that art helps build that sense of community. And I feel like as a sighted person, I miss a lot. And this is a great opportunity for me to learn more.
Great. Yeah, it is. And a lot of us are used to getting folks that we know, that we are familiar with, describe things. I know David always talks about how when he's home with his wife, he uses his wife as audio description. But we all are used to that. But when we can come to the theater and come to these cultural venues, and I've used audio description at places, and I'll tell people that I'm with that are sighted, oh, did you know X, Y, and Z happened about the background of a show? And they'll say, oh, no, I didn't know that. How did you know that? I said, well, I had it on the audio description. Or, I've been to museums and I've heard things like that where I'm giving the directions to people about this happened, that happened, and the tables have turned a little bit there. So it really does give a very sense of independence and autonomy that we can experience the show just as anybody else. And of course, not that there's anything wrong with other folks describing things to us as needed, of course, but that sense of autonomy and independence really exemplifies that community, as we had mentioned. Well, I'd like to thank you both, Lee and Gina. It was wonderful to be speaking with you today about the ADLN. And I know that I am very committed to this process. I'm very passionate about this. I'm very honored to be a part of this community and help to market it and help to drive it forward to where we're going. And I'm very honored that I was able to bring you on to White Canes Connect today and talk about the wonderful work that you're doing and will continue to do. For the listeners, I'd like to encourage you to attend the productions of Small and the My Mama and the Full Scale Invasion coming up, Small at People's Light, and the production of My Mama and the Full Scale Invasion coming up at the Wilma in February. Again, you can go to their websites to find more information. Go to the ADLN website to find out all the information there as well.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you.
Thanks to Lee and Gina for stopping by and giving us the information on the Audio Description Learning Network. And Simon, you've got a lot going on with that, and it's really moving in the right direction as far as getting more folks involved, and they're more cognizant of, hey, if we get this stuff going, we have the chance of bringing in more people to fill those seats.
Yes, I really enjoy the work that they're doing. I really believe in it. I feel like our blind and visually impaired community can really benefit from more opportunities to have audio described content. And as you mentioned, not just one or even two shows, but the goal of this project is to get more opportunities for blind and visually impaired people to go to the show anytime they'd want to go to, just like anybody else would. And I feel like that just levels the playing field of entertainment and equal access for all. So that's one of the reasons why I'm very committed to this project. And I really am very happy to help and also benefit from the work that they're doing. And they're just a really great group of people as well. All the people that I've worked with and had the pleasure to meet throughout this initiative have been really great, and really love the feedback that I've given and been able to help with. So it's really been a win-win on all accounts.
Yeah, they sound like they really just enjoy the project too.
Yes, yeah, they really have a passion for what they do and a passion for theater and arts. And again, I would just encourage everyone who's listening today to think about coming out to the 2 upcoming productions that we have at the end of January at People's Light and in February at the Wilma. And again, we mentioned it in this interview. And if you have any questions about that, you can go to the show notes where we'll have the links to the place where you can buy tickets. And feel free to see if you can come and support this wonderful work that we're doing with the ADLN, because we would love to have more blind and visually impaired people represented. And as they say in the interview, don't hesitate to give your feedback and tell them what you think, what you like, what you didn't like, what can be improved. I know that they also mentioned that we're going to be having a final listening session where many blind and visually impaired people will be invited to give their comments as they see fit. And if you're interested in that, don't hesitate to contact them and see how you can possibly get involved in the project.
Yeah, and for anyone out there, if you have been to I don't, maybe a movie is not a great example, but a live performance where there's been audio description, um, and you want it, but we'd love to hear your how your experience went, good or bad. And if you have tips, so just share any kind of feedback about your experiences, and you can email us. The email address is whitecanesconnect@gmail.com.
Or better yet, let us know via voice so we can play your response on an upcoming episode. The number is 267-338-4495. You've got up to 3 minutes. Leave your name and town if you do leave a voicemail, and we will use it on an upcoming show. Again, 267-338-4495. Lisa and Simon, what a great episode to get things going as we move further into 2024. And I'm looking forward to maybe getting to a show or two in the coming months.
Yeah, and Simon, it's always good to have you on. Thanks for this contribution.
Thank you so much. And again, a big thank you to the ADLN for all their work. And thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful day.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening. Take care.